Okay. All right. Well, I am joined this week by John Goldsmith, who was production designer on season one of Perry Mason, which I very fortunately got to work for him on. So today we're going to talk about that first season and what he went through to get that show made, because it was not an easy show, was it, John?
It was fun though. It was fun. It was intense. We talked about this briefly before, but it was really interesting work and a great team. And everybody who's listening to this should know Randy is fantastic and drew the most important sets and did beautiful work. So yeah, I loved that job. I'm happy to be here and answer questions and talk about it.
There were 100, as I remember, 139 sets. There
Yeah.
were at least 24 locations. Uh, we built all the sets on stage at Paramount, and then we shot all over the county. We were
All
out of the zone numerous times.
Yeah, which is really good for us because you can find all these looks. If you have to do a period picture, it's from the 1930s, you'll find the bones of that close to town, but then there's so much work involved with peeling back what's accrued over time, modernization. But you go further afield and you find these amazing places that maybe they're sleepy. And it's much easier being able to get back to the early, 1930s.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that part of it. Travel's kind of a pain when you've got to spend an hour in a car and go somewhere every day for a few weeks, but it's so nice to get out. LA is in the middle of unbelievably beautiful landscape. So opening with those trenches up on the mesa way north of Santa Clarita was great. I mean, how beautiful to be up in a place like that. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, lots of cool stuff like that on that show.
Yeah, the show takes place in the 1920s. And so both John and Helena the decorator had a huge job in recreating 1920s Los Angeles and its environs. And John was mentioning in the very first part of the show, there is a big World War I battle scene. And in the production's infinite wisdom, they decided to shoot that first thing, first thing up.
Yeah, that was intense.
And
Intense.
that was the uh, kind of pace of the show from then on. As I remembered that when they budgeted the show, they had budgeted for two set deck trucks. And
Oh,
we ended up having five, six every week,
yeah.
where you were dressing two sets and striking two other sets.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the average week there were 40 to 50 set dressers on crew.
I think that's probably right. I would like to go the to the gym first thing in the morning. Paramount has this great gym. So I could get there at like 5 o'clock and I could work out for 45 minutes and then I would walk to stage. And Tommy Simone was Helena's lead man, would be there at his guys all got there at 5:30 and they were done with their meeting at 6. And I'd see them on stage and it'd be like you just said, 20, 30, 40 guys. And Tommy would be handing out like telling them marching orders. And it's all over town with multiple trucks. And I mean, you talk about a logistical thing to figure out. You need a spreadsheet every day, who's going where and when. Oh my gosh. But the show was like that. And that was one of the great challenges of it, but it was also one of the great sort of gifts that you had that much material you had to figure out and got to play with and got to see in the end. But thank goodness for people like Helena and Tommy and you and the crew. Art department, set deck, paint was construction
It was a
great.
great crew.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Hmm.
Well, I'm going to share my screen, and I've got a little, where is it? Where is it? There it is. Okay. All right. I did a little keynote here with some slides.
Cool.
So here is Jonathan Reese, who's playing Perry Mason. This, I believe, was
EB's
EB.
law, his mentor.
And like how do they describe this set in the script? Do you remember when you were
You know,
designing?
there was not a lot of description for these places in the script. For me, this character was so interesting, EB, because he was presenting himself as one thing, as a prosperous lawyer on top of his game, when in fact he was really down on his luck and he was living, on a shoestring and no one knew it. And he had kind of entrapped himself in this like world. So I really wanted, you can see it on the shadows here. This photograph doesn't show the windows to the right, but we designed these bronze window grills that were supposed to make him feel like he was trapped inside this beautiful space. And then the color that we wanted to go for, I really wanted to be sort of mutable, that you could look at it and think it's gray, or you could look at it and maybe it's green, or you could look at it and maybe it's blue. And it had that kind of murky, shape-shifty, like EB's life in a way. So that's all I remember us really wanting to try to express through the set, like a kind of, an expression of his psychological condition in a way, the complexity of it and the sort of sadness, darkness, heaviness of it. Yeah, that's what I remember.
Okay. Now, you'd mentioned that when the show started, the DP and the director had not yet worked out a LUT for the show. And if you're not familiar with those of you aren't familiar with what a LUT is, it's an anagram for a lookup table. And what it is, it's kind of a digital color formula that in post they apply to the footage that gives it its chroma and contrast. And how is it designing paint scheme without knowing what the LUT is, what it's going to look like?
It's a really good question. And luckily, David was such a collaborator, like sharing information and passing ideas back and forth, that I never felt like I was going to do something and maybe it would be pointless. It was all part of the conversation. So I remember always feeling like you just need to do your best work, and you can never know exactly how it's going to translate in camera. So you just do your best and you explain the ideas in conversation. And for the most part, that's worked out. On this show, I think it worked out. I think everything, when you watch the show, looks great. And there was an early conversation about the possibility of shooting this black and white. And I remember reading about, was the show Meg, I think, that Don Burt designed, and talked about using his iPhone to take pictures of everything that he was designing, and then in the iPhone, converting it to a black and white photograph so he could see in real time what things might look like. And I remember thinking, should try to do that like with your brain and with your eye, because I don't have like a black and white filter that I can go to and know this is probably going to be close to what it's going to be. But there were conversations about desaturation, not totally desaturated, but just sort of ramping that down. And maybe the inclusion of some deeper blues or cyans or something in shadows and, things like that. So you pay attention, but in the end, you've just got to do your best work. And yeah.
I know it must be, it's different now with digital, when like you're putting paint scheme together or picking out colors, knowing that when you see the end product, it could be so color graded away from what you thought it was going to look like that it looks like a different color.
Yeah. You know what helped me is you could agonize over the actual color, name, and number that you give the painter to apply to the walls. And whether it's too cool or too warm or too saturated or too desaturated, you could make yourself crazy. I tried to think more or less, and I'd have long conversations with Tim, the director, and David, the DP, about palettes in general. and I looked at paintings from the period. There was no color photography yet, but Kodak had given some color stock to a WPA program where photographers were going out into the world and photographing in very, very, very early color film. And
Mm,
I'd seen those photographs and they were really interesting to me. But I also looked at painters, especially Western painters from the time. And I had a general sense of palette that came from that, which made it much easier to just sort of surrender. We're going to be in this world. So I'm not going to make myself crazy about this particular paint choice. It's going to be in this world, if that makes sense.
mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, here's a photograph of the one policeman's home. Uh,
Yeah. Drake.
it's they lit it so nicely. It's so nice and soft. A lot of the interiors that it's not too blown out, and the colors come. They're rich, but they're muted. They're subdued. It's not.
Yeah. Yeah. This set was so interesting because it's a bungalow in South Pasadena that was a young couple with a baby lived there, and they're hipsters, really cool. Everything was stark white, and they had beautiful new like some IKEA things that modern furniture, and we wanted it to feel like this. And that window, that was their living room, but we made their bedroom with a curtain to close it off. That was their living room, and that window was blocked with a ginormous air conditioning unit that we took out. And then we printed up that wallpaper and told the story that they didn't have a ton of money, so they wallpapered the bedroom, the living room, but they didn't get to the dining room yet. So it was just a color that was a flat paint, just trying to tell some kind of story. But I think David talked about how he loves lighting from exterior on interior sets. He loves lighting primarily with exterior light sources and some soft practicals to help balance. And I think you feel that really strongly here.
Mhm.
Those were, Helena's beautiful choices for lamps and that beautiful green velvet chair. And um, what else can I tell you?
Yeah, it seemed like he really uses that exterior light there. It seems like today I'm on shows or see shows where the onus of the lighting has really been pushed onto the sec deck department.
right,
The
right.
camera sensors are so sensitive now that they don't have you don't have to have wild ceilings anymore. They're lighting everything with practicals,
Yeah, yeah,
and it just looks different.
yeah, yeah. I had a set decorator once, maybe I shouldn't say this, friend tell me like she did not want to dress a set to look like a Lamps Plus store. Because sometimes, yeah, you're asked for so many lamps, it doesn't necessarily make sense. You have one by the bed, one on a table, a floor lamp by a reading chair. Do you really need more than that? Um, so you got to find the balance. This is beautiful, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great set. And they here's the interior of one of the offices. They shot the show on the Sony Venice 2, which was at the time a new camera, and it was Sony's entryway into the large format camera. So in other words, the sensor, instead of being similar in size to a Super 35 millimeter frame, is the same in size as a still camera film frame, which is about 30% larger. And I know David had used it before, I think on the previous show that he'd done, and he really liked it because of the resolution and the color science and everything with the camera. But they, I know they were in my office looking at the model of Perry's house one day, and they were Tim and um,
David.
David were talking, and I could tell there was some problem, and they were talking about the lenses they wanted to use, and they were talking about shooting on with anamorphic lenses. But there was some issue with the camera. I said, "Is it vignetting?" And they said, "Yeah." Because at that time, when the industry started to go digital, people stopped using anamorphic lenses because they just weren't made to go on to fit on those sensors, to go with those sensors. Now there's more anamorphics than there have ever been. But I'm going to go to this here. This is they were shooting a scene with EB, and here on the onboard monitor, you can actually see what is going on here. So they ended up shooting with anamorphic lenses and two-time extension. That's what over here on the left, they're shooting 6K. It was a 6K sensor, 2.0. They're shooting at 24 frames. They're shooting color temperature at 4400. And in the monitor, you're seeing what the sensor is seeing. And on the edges, you can see where it's cropping. So they decided to put out in 2.0 format. So you're losing about 40% of your frame, kind of what you did when you shot Super 35 as anamorphic ratio, and you ended up cropping quite a bit of your negative. So what's happening is the blue is a full frame sensor. The little rectangle inside is a Super 35 sensor. So there you're seeing the image that the camera is throwing onto the sensor area, and it's big enough for a Super 35, but it's getting clipped at the edges of the frame of the full frame of the Venice 2. So they solved it just by cropping off the sides and going with the 2.0 format. And David said it worked out for him because it gave him a little bit of grittiness that he hadn't planned on by losing that resolution. And then they still had that very, very sensitive digital sensor, which is why they could get by with shooting the anamorphics in such low light, because this is pretty low light. If they were shooting this on film with anamorphics, they'd have a lot bigger lighting package. So let me go back. So here's the kitchen scene. Was this the house in Pasadena?
No,
No.
this house is in what's that neighborhood called? It's close to downtown. It's by MacArthur Park.
Okay. Okay. Now I'm remembering it. But here they're shooting on a 60. Let's see. Yeah, 60 anamorphic T2.3, which is not a fast lens, but with that Sony Venice, that it's so sensitive that they can use those slower lenses and not have to have a lot of light. But yeah, I noticed how he likes to light things through with a lot of diffusion to get a nice soft glow. And of course, there's the courtroom. And I love those light fixtures. Those were beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, they really were. The scale of them was perfect for that room.
Now, did you find those, or did you have to have those made?
We found the pendants, Alina did. The sconces on the wall we had to have made, and they were designed to match, like stylistically. Um, David wanted lights on the walls. So I wanted them to tie in with what we found.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks great all together.
Yeah, and again, they're more all of them are accent lighting. You're not really getting a lot of light volume off of them.
Right?
It's most of that light's coming in from the windows.
Yeah. I love that the windows were only on one side of the room. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I just think that's really handsome.
Yeah. And then of course he enhanced that when he went to close-ups. And there's the backing. There was discussion in the beginning about whether that should be green screen out there or digital backing or painted backing. And it ended up being the digital printed backing. Do you remember why they decided to not go green screen? Did he just like being able to see exactly what he was going to get rather than having to?
It's a good question. I remember there was, and you'll remember this because you helped so much find it, but we were saying that this, if I remember correctly, this courtroom was in the original building.
Mhm.
No, this was in the second building. The original building was in the background,
Yeah,
right?
this was
Yeah,
in, you're seeing the old courthouse out of the window, the red brick court.
before it was raised because of
Mhm.
earthquake damage or something. So we were really interested in that story. Not that viewers would necessarily understand or connect, but for us, it was important. And I remember there was some conversation about how helpful it is for actors to not just have a blank green.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
There's value in that. So I'm not sure if that's what drove the choice, honestly.
Mhm.
I just remember those being parts of the conversation.
It was such a beautiful building. It's so sad that, like, I guess so many period buildings in LA, they decided to tear it down.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
although when I was researching all these buildings, I found out that, it was kind of raised off of street level.
yep.
I thought, does it have a basement in there? And I think it had some kind of basement, but literally underneath the whole building was a reservoir for fuel oil.
Wow,
It's
really?
amazing that if it had gone, if it had there had been a fire, the entire downtown would have just evaporated.
Yeah, not a good plan, people. Wow.
Oh, we've got Nikki joining us.
Hi, Nikki.
Nikki,
Excellent.
oh, she's on there somewhere. Okay,
Oh,
Okay.
hi, sorry, I kept hitting
there.
things that weren't happening.
This is John Goldsmith. This is Nikki.
Hey, Nikki.
Hello.
Hi.
So
So
Nikki,
sorry. I realized I'm late.
that's okay. We're recording this, so
Oh, great.
you'll get to see the part that you've missed so far.
Good.
Okay. Where am I? Okay. Also, there it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I agree with that. That I think actors, it's just one more level of uh less of a leap they've got to make
Yeah.
to imagine something is out there when they could be seeing it. It'd be so much
Yeah, I agree.
centering and grounding to have something that of your surroundings.
Yep.
And this was downtown at the
I think it's called Trinity Auditorium, if I
yeah.
remember. Yeah.
Now, how did you have to do a lot of paint work here? The place was in pretty bad shape. What did you have to do to
You
this?
know, super interesting because there was so much work involved with this set. This is one of the biggest, I guess, question marks for me. We all have those when we're reading or designing or working on things like, I really hope this goes well. It will. But when we toured it, the building is a beautiful building. I think it was originally a Methodist um, facility that had a hotel above with a kind of revival space below, and it had been bought by someone. I think he was originally from Morocco, and he had, I think, a string of kind of hipster venues for dance and concerts and things like that.
Hmm.
And he had taken this space, which is the original worship space, and he had pretty much gutted it and put down this carpet with an incredibly bold pattern. Think like 2020 Morocco. Like it was kind of amazing with really interesting light fixtures
Hmm.
in a similar vein. And I remember walking in thinking, I don't know how it's the opposite of the rest of the work, which was getting well, that's not true. I shouldn't say it that way. The work here was just different because everything was so modern.
Hmm.
Uh, we had to cover with hard board the whole room. And then we brought in all our bleachers. Because the director had this idea, which was great, that he wanted a kind of bowl of humanity with Sister, what was her name? Sister, not Amy, Mon Amy. Oh, that's funny. I can't remember her name now. Tatiana character.
The character is kind of based on Amy Ferguson, McPherson.
Amy, yes, Semple. Yes, right. At any rate, he referenced this preacher named Billy Sunday, who was before, I think, the turn of the last century, who had all these revivals around the country and these wooden tabernacles, which were amazing with bleachers and stages. And we wanted that with a sense of vaudeville about it too. So I'm taking this is a long answer to an easy question. There was a lot of work here. We brought in all the stages, all the risers. We wanted that kind of vaudeville feeling. We brought in the neon cross. This particular scene had a kind of spit of stage that came out into the bowl itself, where all these worshipers raised this man up in his wheelchair and put him on the spit on the level with her for a healing. Yeah, this is really good. And Tim had this painting. It's a George Bellows painting of boxers. And David wanted the lighting to feel like that.
Mm.
So we found these historic fixtures, I think Warner's maybe, and brought those in and figured out where they needed to be. There was a 3D model built of the whole thing. Randy, this wasn't you, it was another set designer. And that helped us place all these elements and find the right height for the lights. And I mean, literally this room was stripped bare with a super bold carpet and super modern fixtures and all this other stuff we had to bring in. But the windows are great. They have that kind of, geometric pattern that makes them feel not churchy necessarily, but otherly in a way. So I think in the end, it turned out great as a space for her, and based on that temple in Echo Park. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, so you kept the windows and that was about it.
Correct. Yep. And those upper bleachers, they're not bleachers. Those are the balcony. So we built our bleachers from the flat stage floor to tie in with those and make it feel like the whole thing is coming from the top to the bottom, at that angle. But everything else we brought in, the stage, the banners, the risers, and this is, oh yeah, this is the opening. Those are the 7 cardinal sins, I think, in costume on the stage, on the floor, right? Yeah. And then there was the whole scene with the boat. So there were a lot of things that had to take place on that space. It all had to be really carefully choreographed and figured out. And it was fun.
Yeah, that was quite a scene.
Yeah. I slept better that night when we opened that set, boy. Yeah.
I believe this is another location.
Yep. This is a house in Pasadena. It's owned by well, it doesn't matter. It's a beautiful, beautiful house in Pasadena that we had to, again, like it was beautifully decorated, and we had to replace it with all these period fixtures as the house that Tatiana shared with her mother.
Mm.
Yep. The bones were there.
And then this was the scene that we shot down at Angel's Flight downtown and had to turn it because Angel's Flight has been moved from its original location.
1 block. That's right. And this actually, if I remember right, you tell me, but I think, no, you're right. This is the storefront at the base of Angel's Flight. That's right. And we had to build it out because there's nothing there to exist. Right.
Yeah.
So that Angel's Flight arrival gate is at the bottom of the hill in a new location from our period. And we had to build that corner of the store that existed at the original location from our period.
Right.
So that's what all that is. And there's your green. We couldn't do anything other than that there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's amazing that they were able to get away with it. I'm sure it was reflecting in that glass in the front of the store, but
you can see it right there. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Justin Ball, wasn't that the name? Visual effects guy. Great guy. Did all the work. Yep.
They were good.
Yeah.
They were good. And then here is the upper level with all of the CGI put in, and this was on stage.
No, I think this was up there. So it all had to be comped in after the fact because this is now a big arrival point for a corporate plaza down there. I forget which one.
Mhm.
So it's a
Uh-huh.
big parking roundabout. It's empty. And
Yes,
that left section of Angel Flight Railway doesn't exist.
right,
Had to do that. And that lookout tower. And these rows of buildings going down the hill were so important because one was the Hotel Philippe, where
right.
the kidnappers were talking to the couple on the phone,
Mhm.
that baby, and we had to establish that. So that's what this architecture, it's all CGI, but it's the original buildings, referenced in photographs from the time.
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, look at this. And Black Hat, that was the name of the character in the middle with the baby, Black Hat. It's all coming back to me, Randy. Yeah, touch on his house again. Oh,
And again,
so
really nice soft lighting, really lighting it from, as you were saying, the exterior rather than the interior.
absolutely. That's south facing. If I remember right, this is day. Um, yeah, it's an exquisite room in a beautiful house. And we had to tell that story that her mother has infantilized her to a certain degree. And we thought the bed would be, an interesting way to tell that story. So this bed is overly princess-like for a woman of her station. And Helena found this bed and it's beautiful. We did all that drapery and it's supposed to be like a little girl's princessy kind of, bed for her. And I'm talking too much about art and not enough about photography. But yeah, you're right. The source of light. If I remember right, she was taking a nap, so the practicals would not have been on. But yeah, yeah. Oh, this is another one. This is a beautiful home in Hancock Park, and this home again had been modernized. So what's underneath this desk with that, what's the name of that process? Those skirts that are applied to the front of an old school desk, I forget. But underneath that, there's modern cabinetry that wasn't
Mm.
right for us at all. And Helena brought in all that decorative drapery and those trims, and we did the wallpaper, and all that dressing was trying to tell the story of on this side of the room was his desk, and on the other side of the room was his wife's desk, which he had left almost like a shrine after she left him. So there was a lot of storytelling here, which was really, really fun.
Yeah, I just love the set dressing, that, and another beautiful lamp and just great details.
Yep, yep, yep. Thank you, Helena, and that whole team. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So this is that same house from earlier, the kitchen scene. We called
Okay.
it the boarding house. Uh, and this was a wallpaper that we had printed. And again, it's a room that we had to have emptied and we brought in our own stuff. There was a floor lamp in the corner behind her, if I remember right. And then this lamp for, doing her makeup on her vanity. This lighting is beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
Yeah.
Nice and subtle. Oh, saw that. Looks like EB's office. And there's the grills that
Yeah,
you
those are the grills. I just love that feeling of him being trapped. It's like a prison. We did something similar in Mason's house with the wallpaper. He's inherited the house from his parents, but it's become a terrible burden to him. He can't afford it. He can't keep it. He sees the writing on the wall. He knows where it's going, but he's trapped with this beautiful gift. And so we printed up this wallpaper in the living room that would feel in certain low light conditions, you would sense mostly the vertical lines, which would feel like bars in a cage. So yeah, right there, that wallpaper. Smart man, Randy, jumping ahead. Yeah, yeah. You drew this set. This is a great set. Great set.
This was the one of those stress
Yep.
stress surveys that we drove out, and trying to remember the other set designer, Jeff, that drove, and he was driving like a crazy person. I think he drove like 90 miles an hour all the way out to this house.
Oh my gosh.
And we had 3 hours to
Yeah.
survey it.
3 hours. That's a
Yeah.
huge property.
Yeah.
Wow.
Got there. I thought, how am I going to do this in 3 hours?
Oh, wow. Well, good for you. You
It
did.
was, it was good. I mean, it looked just like their real house.
Absolutely. That stone fireplace was great. Yeah. That's hard to do. That plasterwork is beautiful.
Oh, yeah. This is Alex Scuddy, and he's an amazing plaster.
Wow.
He does really. I think came out of retirement to do this, but yeah,
Thank you.
he does amazing. He does great stuff.
Mhm.
And there's of course the outside.
Yeah. You had to show the sides.
They swore they weren't ever going to shoot from this direction. I said, okay,
Huh.
say so. And here was his bedroom, which was
Yeah.
his dark room.
Yeah.
That was great that he's got the ironing board out for the developing trays.
I loved it. This was his parents' bedroom. He wasn't using the bedroom. He wasn't sleeping in there. It's the nice room in the house, but it was, again, his parents. But that nook, that alcove area, we dressed as his mom's space. It had a sewing table. It had her projects. It had her scaled rocking chair. And that's how he conscripted the ironing board from her space to become part of his work space, the dark room. Yeah, I loved the layers, of the story of that house.
That's what's great is you can just see the layers of
Yeah.
it doesn't look like everything was dumped there at once. It's slowly been a slow build.
Yeah. That's his bedroom. Yep. Yep. I love the change in levels here. I think it's so interesting and so strange, but those kinds of nooks and crannies, I think they help immensely sell us as believable.
Such
Yeah.
a strange house.
Yeah. Huh.
This was all part of the house, even though you didn't film there? You didn't film the inside there?
We only filmed the exterior at the location, and then Randy drew the interior, which was to tie into it. We made small changes, but worked mostly with the original layout. And that's what this is. This is the stage set.
There you are.
Who is that young man? Right? That's before COVID and strikes and all of that mess.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. That's great. That hallway was awesome, right?
Yeah. It
How
was
much did I stress about that ceiling? For real. How silly. How silly. It looks great. Yep.
it was a funky house. It really was.
Funky was good for us.
Yeah,
Sometimes
so
a lot of the
glad
work
that
involved.
I'm
Sorry?
so glad you kept so much of the detail of the original house in it, because it's just so, kept what was there and added on to it.
Yeah, it's so important for making it feel real world. So often part of our work is trying to add things that make it feel idiosyncratic. You know what I mean? As opposed to just a simple container.
Here was in the one article in International Cinematographers Guild, you were talking about the model
Yeah.
that you had Adam make up. And because I tell people all the time, physical models are so valuable.
Critical.
People think, oh, well, we have digital models, because it's not the same thing.
There are things you miss. Digital models are extremely helpful. They are also critically important, but they're not the same thing. As a physical model, if you can have both, that's the best of both worlds. You see things like David and Tim spent hours over this model upstairs on a conference table outside their offices, figuring out how to choreograph the scenes. You can't do that, with goggles on, looking at or not even with goggles on, standing around a monitor together.
Yeah.
You need 3 dimensions with, again, like models of soldiers and horses and carriages and all that stuff that you're dragging around in a physical model to figure it out.
Yeah.
So I loved this model. Yeah, it was great.
And they drug this out to the location too, didn't they?
What?
Literally during shooting to talk about.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Yeah.
Now, one thing I remember that kind of threw us is that this was supposed to be a night scene. They decided to shoot it in the middle of the day.
You know what? You're right. Something happened. Why was that? Was it weather or turnarounds or I honestly don't remember now, but you're right. Yeah. And we were so concerned because you look at that and you think, I'm not in oh, I'm pulling the blank now on the location of the
Supposed to
battle.
be in France.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're looking at Southern California mountains in the distance from a mesa top. So you can see all the smoke they added and the atmosphere and visual effects so much. Wow, that's the same shot.
Yeah, same shot
Right, Randy?
before and after effects.
Got it. Fantastic.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out
Find them. Those are great.
how in the world are they going to make this look like it's in
Yeah.
France?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Goodness.
In fact, I found a little reel by Pixelmoto that did most of the effects, and it's interesting because you see a lot of the work that they did in the show.
Cool. Gosh. Holy moly.
It's amazing to see it that way.
Absolutely. It looks so simple, doesn't it?
It really does.
Gosh. Should have gone into visual effects. Wow.
Meanwhile, this shot took a month.
Good point. Thanks for showing that, Randy. That was really interesting.
Yeah, I found that. I thought, oh, this is great.
Look at that. That's the physical model or that's your digital model? That's the physical model. I see the T-pins.
Yeah, this is
Yeah.
I just printed out the digital model. I have one of those new printers that just spits out a. Yes.
I want one of those. Wow. That's
Yeah.
a big step.
And then here's the fountain that you built on the other stage. And those
I
facades were
love it.
amazing.
Wow, we were good, weren't we?
Yeah. Okay.
Nikki, you know he's kidding, right? He's kidding.
No, I remember seeing it in the show.
Touche.
Yes, I knew he was kidding.
Wow. Wow. Huh.
Well, do you have any parting thoughts? Anything that this is, you're not going to have PTSD tremors once we get off?
You know what? I might have if I'd watched it by myself, but talking to you and watching it like that, it makes me, well, it actually makes me interested in getting back to work. Let's hope that all this stuff gets resolved because it's actually really fun. It's really, my boys use this word satisfying all the time. They can have a bite of ice cream and say, this is so satisfying. But that word now for me, like watching that was so satisfying. I feel like we did some really interesting stuff and yeah, the stress levels were high, but we had a good time and made some interesting work and now it's out there in the world. So that's fun to look at again. It's not PTSD, thankfully. Yeah.
That's the good thing. I think it's part of our nature is we tend to at least hopefully only remember the good parts of an experience.
Yeah. It helps to have friends to keep us, right, doing that and not spin out over here. Yeah. Yeah. Huh. Well, Randy, thank you. Is there more to talk about?
Oh, John, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for doing this. It was great.
For me too.
Yeah, I
Yep.
can't wait to see the whole thing. I loved the end part that I saw.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Enjoy the beginning, Nikki.
Yeah, she missed the puppy and the clown part.
Oh, I'm even more excited.
Yeah.
All right. So let's do this again.
What happened with Perry Mason? Was it did it get canceled because of the pandemic, or was it one of those weird ones?
It went to season 2 with another great designer. I had moved at that point and wasn't in LA anymore. And then after season 2, they didn't renew.
But was it the pandemic or was it just that?
No, I think it was, who knows what? I think it was
Okay.
economics. I think it was, everybody being just alarmed at how much, I don't know. I'm not a studio guy, but the powers that be decided, no, we're not going to keep going. So
I have to say I loved him because I filmed at a lot of those locations, and it was always fun to try and figure out what locations I filmed. It was like, wait, I know that. Don't I know that? Maybe I don't.
yeah, that's the e-bell. I've shot there before.
I know. I did a lot of those. I'm like, oh, the email, I know that one.
Right. Yeah, that is fun. LA shows are fun. Yep.
I'm glad they got that one out while they did, because now apparently they have decided they don't want to do period stuff.
I know, right?
So
They want sexy stuff with young people. That's what I've heard.
add in sports,
Sports.
want to license every kind of sports they can. So
Yeah.
boy.
Okay, let's end on a good note.
Yes.
What should we say? Right?
Yeah.
Right? Now I gotta think of something.
Well, just
Come on, Nikki.
we'll be
I'm just imagining Perry Mason doing sports things. I'm like, what?
that's it. Maybe he becomes a soccer player or something.
There you go. Call Matthew Reese. Get on it, would you please? That sounds great.
Well, take care of yourself. Thanks
You
again.
too. Nice to meet you, Nikki.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, we'll talk again soon.
Okay.
Take care, you guys.
Bye-bye.